Hello and welcome to ET Ask the Expert. My name is Suresh Venkat. My guest today is Vani Kola, Managing Director, Kalari Capital. Vani, welcome to the show. First question, Vani. You've had a stellar track record, and that's putting it mildly, with companies like Mintra, Dream11, Bluestone, Elastic Run. Looking back, what's the common factor in all your successful investments?
Thank you, Suresh, for having me on this session, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. And I hope that'll be useful to founders in some way. The learnings and the experiences that I've had over the last 2, 3 decades. Talking about startups, success in a startup is to me a little bit like cooking, which I like doing, a great meal. Everyone has a recipe, but the magic is in how the ingredients and the timing happens. Okay, we all have a recipe for something. So for me, the recipe for uh, investing in startups starts with the primary ingredient, which is the founder. I look for their clarity of purpose, and I have strong views on that. And when a founder has that, when they walk into the room with that, uh, where the I can understand the problem they're solving, why it matters to the world, and how big that is, and also why it matters to them, that obsession to why it matters to them. That's a second ingredient. Okay, that's when founders stop chasing valuation milestones. There's nothing wrong in celebrating milestones, but you have to think about milestones versus lasting value and impact. For that, obsession would mean that literally practicality is they need to give 10, 15 years of their life. The mindset to do that ultra matters, and that's when you build something that lasts. And when I say something that lasts, of course we all want things that last, but in my business, unfortunately, if they don't build things that scale, we don't make money. Now this is a rare ingredient, so that's what I look for in founders. But then there's a second factor, which is, uh, let's assume they have those attitude and commitment. They need relentless focus on product and customers. Customer could be consumer, could be enterprise, whatever. And I say that because that is where you continue to pivot. You don't pivot as a person. Your core values don't get pivoted that often. Of course, life changing things make us evolve, but the product and the customer is something you're constantly learning. And for me, at the beginning, because see, we are an early stage investor, the product is the heartbeat of the company. I can't give product strategy to a founder. We can help them figure out many things, but not that easily, because that's their wisdom, that's their insight. So I'll take one example. You mentioned several companies. Thank you. When I first met Mintra team, what struck me wasn't fashion, though we did the diligence to understand all that. It was their insight that Indian retail has never really served the customer. Now, that's a big statement. Uh, we can hammer on that. But for now, the idea that someone would pay for convenience, for returns, which wasn't freely available to investor to consume Indian consumer in retail easily, and for a experience that at that time was radical. Maybe passe today was radical back then, and they were obsessive about that. So the founders who win are the ones that sweat the details. Details are always not your big vision. It's the what really ticks and clicks. So that they obsess over how the product makes people feel, and they know how to deliver it. And when you get that right, your consumers become your biggest marketing team. And that is important for a startup, because they don't have millions to throw in marketing, and even if they did, they will fail. So how do I sum it up? To me, the common factor is that purpose, the obsession, and that stubbornness to keep building, even if at times, and hopefully most times, no one is watching you.
You know, a lot of people talk about product market fit, but not enough people talk about founder VC fit. You found a great founder, but you may be the wrong VC, or somebody may be the wrong VC. How do you assess founder VC fit?
uh, Founder VC fit is everything. I wish people talked about it more or understood it more, because the founder VC isn't this weekend fling. You're just meeting the IC says yes. It's a decades long marriage, and guess what? There is no honeymoon phase. The moment they give you money, they are engaged and involved. So a founder VC relationship works and creates value when there is trust and shared purpose. I have to believe in the same way you are believing in your company, and both of us also have to be aligned on the risks and the challenges. Uh, and not diminish that, but also not obsess over that. Should have the belief we can overcome that. Some say founders may want a hands off investor, just hire me the money, I know how to do the rest. They may be right or wrong, doesn't matter. If that's the case, then they should look for investors who believe in that or want to do that. Others may want a sounding board, or and really build that as a sounding board, may want somebody who really in their domain is a door opener, or someone who has really been through the trenches and can give you deep detailed operational insights. None of these are right or wrong. They're just different needs, and different people can best fit those needs. So not every VC is right for every founder, and vice versa. The burden to ensure compatibility lies as much with the VC as it lies with the founder, even more so with the founder. They should choose who's the right VC for them, because you're going to spend 10 years. In that time, everything is going to change. Market is going to change. Whatever plans you made, somewhere they're going to not be right. Funding winters will always arrive uninvited. So the only thing that gets through those times is because there is that trust and shared purpose. And the second thing is the clarity of roles. Of course, always the founder drives. The VC, maybe rides shotgun and is giving you a navigation map. I've been there many times, this road, that road, whatever. So, it's important to know how much you want them to navigate. Let's just say, some people want to drive and have nobody to navigate, and some people are okay with it. How much? So you need to just think through that aspect, right? You're always the driver. There's never a question about that. But just like we talked about the VC role, the clarity of role and how much engagement is really important. And the last thing is the time horizon. This is something which always surprises me, because founders don't realize even the best of investors have a time horizon, and that alignment is also important. Now they may choose investors that are thinking quarters, whereas what you need is investors who believe in you for years, or they believe that investors are for lifetime, and they're not, honestly, because they have their own. And that's not right or wrong. It's you know just transparency and honesty of that conversation on time horizon, and not having delusion about that, I think, is very important. So trust, long term alignment are important to manage the founder VC fit, and that's when energy flows and true magic happens beyond just getting that check.
Thank you, Vani. Your successes, like I said, are well documented. Mintra, Dream11, Bluestone, Elastic Run. Can you tell us about some of your not so successful investments? How do you deal with failure, for instance?
um, uh, there are many more not so successes than there are successes in every VC's book. Okay, doorstep. Over years, what happens is there is a um, pattern recognition. Okay, and that's why you are also, even the most successful VCs are sort of, how should I say, trapped in that. So the F word in venture capital, failure. Okay, that's the F word. So there's no VC without a battle scar, including me. And if you don't have that, all that tells me is that it's a investor who has never taken enough risk, and that's an oxymoron of an investor. Okay, so failure, I know, is an exception because I'm not seer with a crystal ball. Okay, I know it's inevitable. We are backing companies at uncertain stages. We have our own experience with certain pattern recognition, but guess what? The world is always changing. Some ideas I invest in will soar, some will crash, and some quietly go, succeed, and we never saw them and never invested in them. So, uh, you know, failure. So I'll tell you what I obsess over. Occasionally, failure is founder teams imploding, or founder founders that are caught up in the hubris and are not really keeping their eye on operating their business meticulously. These situations, they make me very sad. Okay, because there was an opportunity, and we somehow wrecked it. Huh? And it is somehow feels human, unfortunately, to create that needless wreckage. Needless only because with a little wisdom, with a little advice, with a little thought, could have been avoided. And there I just rack myself, to say, what did I miss? uh, what could we have done more? Because founders put their heart and soul into building something, and when it doesn't work, it hurts them, but it also creates damage and hurts a lot more people around them, that they may or may not fully comprehend and realize in that moment. So that's one kind of failure. So I do postmortem on every failed investment, only because that's the only way I can learn and hopefully be a little bit wiser for the future and sharpen my pattern recognition. This is a continuous learning path. Okay. We are imperfect always at any given moment. And that perspective is, see, VC is a game of long odds. You can do everything right, and still you will make mistakes. But the beauty of this business for me is, it takes needing to be right sometimes. You can not be wrong all the time, but you have to be, you have to accept that you'll be wrong several times, but you have to be phenomenally right a few times for this to truly work. So, how do I deal with my failed investments or failure to invest in certain great companies and great founders? Is, look, this business requires to accept with humility that you are wrong and you have your imperfections. You have to be curiosity to reflect and learn almost on a daily basis. And listen, some dark humor you need in life to just laugh at your own self and say, "Wow, was that stupid? Really? I mean, what was I thinking?" So I think it's important. Those are sort of the tools of trade I use to, be energized, inspired every day to do the job I do. Because if every deal worked, uh, I don't know, I should be a fortune teller versus being a venture capitalist. I'm only uh, just a venture capitalist, and so I fail sometimes.
So, speaking of dark humor, it seems to me like venture capitalism and Bollywood has a little bit in common because you can produce a lot of failed films, but one or two big hits, and you have a DDLJ that runs for 30 years. Right?
Except that I don't think we have the glitz and the glamour. I think we just do from outside. If people really got into our business, we just do
Yeah.
boring grunting jobs every day.
Let's talk about a company like Elo or Ilo. I don't know how it's pronounced
Ilo
exactly.
Ilo.
Ilo.
Yeah,
Didn't make money for years.
yeah,
And then suddenly started making money in 2025.
yeah.
So the question is, how as a VC do you deal with a company that doesn't seem to make money for years and years on end?
There are so many myths about our business, honestly, Suresh, and I really don't know how to demystify it. But um, overnight success generally takes 5 years. You come and talk about, oh, headlines, CT, all that, but never really what happens behind the scenes. And for almost all companies, that's true. Maybe there are few lottery winners, but for most people, it's not the story. But we all want to uh, package some amount of DLJ. No marriage or romance is that successful. It's just fantasy, right? So we can watch it in a theater. So, but for a long time, Ilo or any other company, but here you ask them specifically, they're quietly building depth, not chasing hype. Meaning that while when they didn't have revenue, um, they were really, really building engagement. Without engagement in their business, they can't really have revenue. So they were spending time on creating a category in live entertainment that was specifically Indian, felt Indian, right? Was Indian, rooted in very local culture, language, and community. And for some of that, even core technologies to make that scalable, efficient, affordable didn't exist. So they were building all that. And when users truly connect is when they are willing to pay. Until then, you can't monetize even if you wanted to. There has to be a certain network effect you create. You and it's not that years and years not having revenue is the sin. It's how much money are you burning during that time. During that time, you need to be on a low burn model and continue to create, discover, which they were doing. So they were not burning much money at all. Today, uh, when they turned on the monetization engine, which they didn't even have, even if you liked it and wanted to pay, they didn't have any way for you to pay for it. But when they did turn that on in the 2024 time frame, they turned on the creator-led monetization module through virtual gifting, microtransactions, and deep fan engagement. And hence, everybody sort of notices today, I think they're at about $75 million run rate, which is very good for any company that, has didn't have any monetization, let's say, uh, 24 months back. And but for that flywheel to happen, today they have more than a lakh and a half active creators, and the creator success drives user engagement, that drives monetization. But for every business, and in Ilo's, this is the flywheel. But for every business, for them to monetize, they have to get to that flywheel effect, and and until you get to the flywheel effect, don't burn insane money.
I'm going to change tracks a little bit and ask you a couple of macro questions. The political equation between India and the US, does that impact any of the startups in India and your decision to invest or not invest?
Uh, I have the least understanding and expertise in politics, but Indo US corridor was always a big influence, right? Some of it was access to market, some of it was really just talent flow, some of it was also growth capital, and at one point it also used to be exit for investors from IPOs and M&As. The exit for IPOs and M&As is not relevant as much at all, because Indian capital markets really are best for these Indian origin companies from exit today. That's a different topic, but it's not relevant in the Indo-US corridor. But access to markets, of course, continues to be very relevant, and to a lesser degree, growth capital, because we have also grown a lot from capital access from domestic. Still relevant, but not as much as it was, let's say, even 5 years ago, or definitely a decade ago. Access to markets still relevant, but access to market, unless regulations especially ban you, which hasn't quite happened, uh, is not really the issue. So the innovation hub, right, of India and US investor interest into that, I think is still quite active and deeply engaged. So the political shifts may change policy priorities and the underlying economic relationships in some areas, but specific to venture capital, uh, since that's the only place I can comment or have any context to comment, is reasonably resilient. So, in fact, the collaboration in technology, clean energy, digital infrastructure will continue to deepen, and startups will benefit from that openness of access to partnerships and global market. Look, I'm an optimist by nature. So while politics may create short term distractions and noise specific to startup funding and startup development in India, I think the long story is very much intact and unaffected to some degree.
You mentioned capital markets and IPOs in your previous answer. So my next question is about that. India has had a more or less sluggish stock market for the last 1 year. The Sensex hasn't gone up or down, but the IPO market has been stellar. Urban Company, Tata Capital, and LG of late. What explains this dichotomy in your opinion? Sluggish stock market, but stellar IPO market.
Yeah, it's one of those paradoxes. Like you said, sluggish stock market, but the IPO market on fire. Look, I'm not a public market investor, but obviously our companies go public. So I'll tell you, it's about different pools of money, okay, that are investing into these two markets. The broader market is weighed down by the global volatility and the FII outflows and diminishing inflows. But IPOs today are more and more tapping into fresh domestic savings, retail investors, mutual funds,
Family
new,
offices, all of that.
yeah, new participants or new entrants, right? And we are also seeing these new stories drive excitement because that supply didn't exist before, right? This um, uh, fragmented markets getting truly organized for new levels of service and convenience, like urban company like you mentioned, or Bluestone that just went public, which took new categories of consumer access. So consumer tech, manufacturing, clean energy, some of these sectors that you talked about are very new sunrise sectors in their narrow niche, right? So, and investors want to buy into the next decade. They're not just buying into yesterday's sector, and there is a excitement about it. Now, will it deliver? Will it not? We'll have to write that story a decade looking back. But today, we all believe that these companies will deliver the better growth over the next decade, and that's where the new sort of domestic pools of capital are opening up. So structurally, the India's capital base has matured, and more household savings are moving into equities, and also the regulation is building that confidence. So while the secondary market, which is looking for more near term outcomes, may be a bit fatigued, the IPO market is very optimistic and hence is vibrant.
No question on no interview on startups can avoid the AI question.
Yes.
Right? So AI, Gen AI. I mean, AI has been around since 1960s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Gen AI is relatively a newer phenomenon.
Yeah.
Only question that's on everybody's mind. Every other technology has created more jobs than it replaced, more or less every technology.
Yeah.
Do you think AI will create more jobs than it destroys in the medium term or long term?
From the land of Shiva, destruction and renewal and creation are a
Uh,
cycle that
yeah.
go hand in hand. So, will AI steal your job? Uh, it's more like someone using a different tool with AI might steal your job. So it's not so much that we are going towards job loss as much as that we are going towards job shift. So I think AI will change what we do, and how we do it, especially the how we do it. So the real question is, how fast can each of us, me included, in my business, continue to think about how do you reskill and adapt, right? So adaptation is evolution, which of course has been going on for millennia in one form or the other. But 40% of the jobs will be deeply exposed to AI, and the remaining 60% are not going to be immune. They will also be exposed. How deeply is the question, right? And though they may get augmented versus completely exposed. So in India, our services led workforce, right, may give us a window of opportunity to create employment amplifier and not a disruptor. But coders, teachers, doctors will all have to, and other professions will have to adapt AI to be more effective and more productive, more efficient, right? And some will do that better than not, and not just as cost levers, right? They have to create better outcomes. So I think the focus for all of us should be to reskilling at scale, and valuing and embracing that augmentation over automation, and creating new roles for adaptation of data and that design. So AI, today, at least in my lifetime, let's put it, won't replace humans. It will reward the certain human skills more.
OpenAI recently was valued, I think, at $500 billion, if I'm not mistaken, and that created a murmur, or say a hubbub
Yeah.
in the AI world, that we are over investing in AI infrastructure and data centers and chip manufacturing, all of that. Do you think that it has all the makings of an investment bubble that's likely to collapse in the next few years?
I'm 61 years old. I say that because I've seen enough hype bubbles and I've been part of it. I lived through painfully the 2000 internet investment euphoria burst. And so the AI exuberance feels very uh, deja vu, not in a positive way, right? But these are cycles. It didn't mean just because 2000 internet burst means internet was useless, or no valuable internet companies got created, or no investors made money. It's just that when you are investing without deep understanding, and you were wanting to be part of a hype bubble, sometimes you can still make money, but you don't know when the bubble is going to burst, when you are on a high low. So though, then there are that mistakes today. If you see, it's not even the AI. The problem is what we are estimating as the AI usage, the energy crisis that's going to create, and how these large companies are locking up energy centers. So that becomes a raw material. We are going to need, at least from whatever projection, somewhere between 40 to 100x more energy. How are we going to generate it, and who's going to own it? And sometimes ownership of, till it becomes a commodity, raw material become new rulers, so to speak, and material access matters. Energy is one of those things. So I don't think there's any outright collapse that's going to happen. But like in any bubble, today also, there will be well funded, cash rich, vision heavy companies that are not in debt and can withstand the risk systemically. And that overbuilt, like a uh, right kind of a forest fire, is never bad, because it brings back basics, right? But um, those where those foundations are leveraged to last, or genuine innovation to oversee the next wave, doesn't exist. So those are the paradoxes of the bubbles that repeat itself almost all the time. So when there is accelerated future, which we are going to see with AI, certain things will get mispriced, and then correction is inevitable. Correction is always happening, but sometimes the correction is very large, which will sooner or later happen in AI. Whether it will happen this year, next year, 2 years from now, I don't know, but they are usually, in my opinion, a very healthy reset. Unless, of course, we are part of completely losing everything, then it doesn't feel so good. So every tech cycle, I've seen speculation and I've seen that reset, but it leaves the core infrastructure stronger to build and powers the next generation of innovation. So I'm not as bothered about the collapse, and I do hope we have backed the right things that don't all collapse.
I like the forest fire analogy. It does destroy some, but leaves the overall forest and the ecosystem stronger. I'm going to wrap up this interview with two more questions, and now I'm going to go into a couple of personal questions.
Okay.
It's 2025, Vani. We still don't have enough women founders or even women on boards, more than the mandatory requirement. Is there an accelerated way to fix this? We've been talking about this for years and years.
Yeah, decades, no?
Yeah.
So, it's a topic very close to my heart, okay? And it's a topic over maybe the last decade, especially. I have reflected on it a lot with seeing my two daughters come of age and maybe some blinders that I was willing to also be mature to recognize and confront. I really want and wish there were some shortcuts, but the honest answer for me is I don't see that yet, right? But I know it's a topic, the more we talk, perhaps things will emerge. We all know that there is a systemic gap, enough data, research, all of that. We also know that the full economic potential, with half the population missing from the entrepreneurship table, can't truly fully develop the India growth story. True all over the world, but since we are talking about India, that's true. And that representation matters. So these are things that we all can agree. The question is, what can you do about it? What can I do about it? But if each of us do what is possible for me, which is really all that we have control over, because I don't have any control on policy or this or that or something else, which is neither my expertise nor my sort of assigned place in this universe today. I have to think about what is possible for me. Each of us have to think about that. And anything we do in that regard, if this problem matters to us, if anything we do creates that multiplier ripple effect. So, for me, I started this a program called CXXO from Kalari, which is to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem from resources, knowledge, that community, but also to set aside some capital for investment and mentorship. And with this, we can help a few people multiply their ambition. Okay. But we all have to want change and do what we can intentionally, and recreate those open networks. But it starts also with inclusion in our own mind, and if you are in a place to open allocation of capital, we have to do that intentionally. And if we do this, I'm also convinced, simply as a moral cause, or speak about it only as a moral cause. Look, human sentiment and actions, sentiment as a moral cause, we all relate to. Action is always very mercantile and mercenary, and hence, unless we shift the conversation into it's an economic strategy, true growth will be slow in unlocking. And but if I wish more of us spoke about it, from it is a required economic strategy, which I believe, by the way, genuinely.
Absolutely. You can't have one half of the population out of the economic workforce. It makes no sense. Okay. Manikola, I'm going to ask you a final question, and we're going to end on a slightly lighter note.
Okay.
In the Bollywood version of your life, who should play Vanikola?
Why would anybody want a Bollywood version of
It's the
my
era
life?
of Bollywood biopics. There's likelihood that they're going to make a biopic on you. So who should play you?
I give that a zero probability, honestly. and there is absolutely no reason for anybody to do it or want to know my life story. And I'm also born in an era of pragmatism, and in a growing up in a middle class family, in a South Indian family, where put your head down, do your work, good karma pays back, your life and your destiny is to live your dharma, whatever. These are principles by which I've been so conditioned that I really can't answer your question, because the premise sounds a bit ludicrous to me.
All right. I would nominate Tabu to play Vanikola if it were up to me.
That would be wonderful, and but I would advise against finding somebody better suited whose life is worth emulating.
Vanikola, thank you for talking to us on Ask the Expert.
All right, take care. Bye bye.